even his biographer uh, paints a sketchy picture of him. It's, it's sad because he seems to have been a troubled man, and by all accounts, he committed suicide at the end of his life. Although that seems to have been more from physical distress than mental anguish. There was something wrong with him, and I think he couldn't take the pain. Um, he came as a very young man to Mount Vernon to tutor the children, Nellie and Wash, and became Washington's secretary as a consequence of that. That wasn't enough for him to do, to tutor the children, and Washington's books were in disarray. Lund, his cousin, had been looking after Mount Vernon during the Revolution, and when Washington came home, the thing was a bloody mess. Nothing tallied, nothing balanced. He was deeply in debt. And so Lear came in and took care of that, as well as began taking care of the correspondence. He was Harvard educated, something of a polyglot, and good with the children. Martha adored him because he was very kind to her and helped her write letters because she was very nearly illiterate. Her education had been dancing schools and things like that. So he was able to help her with that sort of thing and do it in a way that was not at all condescending.
And I don't think he cared for Washington at first, because Washington did tend to be aloof, especially with employees, and that's essentially what he was early on. But the devotion to Washington that he developed was almost beyond hero worship. He had a tremendous amount of affection for Washington, but also he was very protective. What he did during the presidency, and we try to make this clear, he's called a secretary, but he really was the equivalent of what we would call today chief of staff. He handled all of the details of the household, as well as important correspondence with Congress and diplomats. He did so many things that we'll probably never even know completely, and wore himself out in the process. And plus, he was never treated outside of the household, I think, with the respect that he was inside the household. And that's why he did experiment with leaving. Particularly, he was planning to leave before she died, but when his wife, Polly, died suddenly in 1793, he kind of sped up those plans. But he never, as we point out, he never really found his way. And until he found his way back to the Washingtons, and of course was working for Washington again as his secretary when Washington died, and he was there in the House. And that, I think that in some ways that untethered him, and he never really was going to be comfortable in any other job that he had after that.
He also found Jefferson very congenial, and that became a problem, especially after Jefferson's departure from the administration. Lear and Jefferson philosophically were quite compatible. And he became a Jeffersonian, which estranged him from Martha and the rest of the family, even though he had married Fanny and then another niece when Fanny died. That is a tragedy. There's always the surrounding aura of some sort of mystery or intrigue about Lear as a result of that, I think, because he's often blamed for purging the papers, for going into the papers and doing things to them, possibly at the behest of Jefferson. And there's no evidence for that, other than the speculation that he might have done this because he did become a Jeffersonian. And the division on that score was so much of a significant and dire that once crossed over into you became an apostate to the people who had left, and they never forgave him. Lear was careless about some things. He stole from Washington. He didn't actually put his hand in the till, but he redirected some rent money into his own accounts. And when Washington saw this in the ledgers and confronted the people who he thought were in arrears, they told him they paid Lear. And Lear had to confess that he had been short and had been, as a consequence, in need of funds. And this seemed to be an unauthorized loan, which, oddly enough, any other human being in the world, it would have been an irreparable breach. But for Washington with Lear, no, he forgave him and said to continue as always, as he did. And Lear was with him when he died.